Hello, KFC SuperCoaches. It's round 17, the second big bye round of the year. We got Origin players out, people on the bye, injuries galore. It's a really tough week for SuperCoach. I am Tom Sangster and Wilson Smith is here as well. How's your team shaping up, Wilso?
Well, assuming I use I've still got a boost left. So once I boost and get 4 players in this week, I think I've got 15 on the park. So
15, wow, that's huge.
I managed to get 14 on the field for the first bye round, and then made some trades the last couple of weeks, and got 15 on the park this week as well. But it's been a bit of a balancing act because lots of teams running out of trades, myself included. So it's sort of like bringing in people, but also bring in keepers that, not just play this week, but also players you want to have for the rest of the season. So it's been a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, 100%. Look, I've got 12 at the moment with 2 trades this week. I'll probably make the third to get 13. I'm not particularly impressed with that number, but as you say, you want to be bringing in guys who are keepers or borderline keepers to the end of the year. So in terms of the teams today, big news on Nico Hines. We're expecting that, but he is available for his club. So massive tick there. Isaiah Tass has been named as well, so big tick there for the Rabbitohs. And then Grant Anderson, the cheapie from last week, has been named too. So 3, I wouldn't say unexpected cheapies for this week, but good news on 3 guys coming through. In terms of my trades, Madison is in. He has been named to return from that rib injury. What are your thoughts on Maddo?
I do like the Madison buy. I didn't like it earlier on in the season when a lot of other people were jumping on, just because he was sort of back and forth in between the starting side and the bench. But I think we've seen that sort of regardless of how they used him this year, he's been really consistent. So I do really like that pick, and it's a really good matchup against the Tigers this week as well. I think a lot of the high scoring players of the round could potentially be Eels players. So I do really like it.
Yeah, Brandon Smith is in for me as well. He's in for Ben Trbojevic. I just think that, I know he hasn't been great this year, but he's at a really good price for a player of his calibre. So he's in for me as well. Third trade is undecided. Remember, you do have 3 trades, and if you boost, you're up to 4 this week. That's up from the 2 and 3 in the normal weeks, given that it is a bye round this week. What trades are you thinking, Wilson?
I'm not fully locked in yet, but I've got some pretty crazy ideas up my sleeve, actually. I'm fairly confident that I'm going to be bringing in Ryan Papenhuyzen and Latrell Mitchell. I bought in Dylan Edwards during the last bye round, and he's made me a fair bit of cash. So I can pretty much, since Latrell's pretty cheap, I can pretty much move Dylan Edwards on straight to Latrell, and then we'll make some other moves to bring in Papenhuyzen as well. And I think there's a few cheapies this week that sort of come in for the week. They're a starter, and then they become enough. So for the Broncos, I can't remember what his name is. Zach.
Yeah, I know who you mean. Is it Hoskins?
Yeah, Zach Hosking. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so he sort of, bottom dollar cheapie, comes into the side this week. He's starting in the back row, and then immediately becomes enough. So at this point in the season, I'm kind of just bringing in. I'm sort of done with cheapies. I just want to bring in nuffs and guns. So nuffs and guns specifically who play this bye round. So those are 3 trades that I'm thinking of making. I'm still undecided on the 4th, but I will be bringing in someone who's playing this week.
Nice. Well, let's run through the winners and the losers. First winner is Nico Hines. So he's going to play, even though he's in the extended squad for New South Wales. He will play for the Sharks unless there is some sort of crazy injury or COVID situation there for New South Wales. They do play the first game of the round, though, so it's going to be interesting who you go with VC and C. I have Hines at fullback. It's the same game as Papenhuyzen. So you're going to have to choose one of those guys as your VC or C. You can't do a loophole with those players. It's one or the other as your VC, and then you see on someone else later in the round. So what are your thoughts there? Early chat on Nico Hines v Pappenhausen as VC in that first game.
Yeah, well, I during all my buy preparation, I was going in with the expectation that Nico Hines wouldn't be available to me. So, like, I think the fact that he's playing and he's an extra body for the majority of SuperCoach teams is a massive plus for the round 17 buy. But I think it's a pretty tough matchup for both of them. I mean, Hines up against Storm, but the Storm, missing a few players and looks pretty uninspiring, barring the last 5 minutes of the game against the Sea Eagles last week, when Ryan Pappenhausen scored all of his points. Paps was on like 25 points with 10 minutes to go, and then ends up on 135. So I think if you're going to chuck the VC on one of them, I think the matchup probably suits Paps just slightly more. And I think last week we showed he can score 115 points in 10 minutes. So I'll be VCing Pappenhausen for sure.
Yeah, it's a tough little run for the Storm with the Origin players out or failing to back up, like Munster, etc. Plus 2 games in Sydney at 2 of the more parochial grounds in Brookvale Oval and then Shark Park this weekend. It's a tough little road trip for them. So I'm going to go on VC Pappenhausen, but I can certainly get around why people would want to go Nico Hines as VC. Also in that game, we got Grant Anderson. Good news on him. He has been named. So, look, just lock him in for your 17. Wasn't that impressive last week, but hopefully we can eke out a bit more cash before selling him off to enough.
Yeah, I mean, last week was the first sort of game where he's looked really, really bad. The week before wasn't amazing. He only got 32, but 12 points last week. And really, until the last 10 minutes, Storm were never really in it, and it was all Pappenhausen. So I think you can excuse Anderson's 12 from last week. Plus, he is a body on the field for the bye, which is, I think, the biggest plus.
On Pappenhausen, I know we've spoken about him a lot, but he is by far the most purchased player this week. I own him already, but it makes absolute sense to bring him in, so I think we're in agreement on that. Ryan Madison, also really popular. I'm bringing him in. He's back from a rib injury, or he's certainly been named to return. Whether he's on the bench, whether he's starting, which he is this week, I don't think it matters for Maddo. He doesn't need the full 80 minutes, and a lot of it is based on offloads and attacking stats. So I'm all around him this week, and it's probably either going to be him or Papali'i as my captain with the Hail Mary VC on Pappenhausen.
I really like Papali'i. I still have a few concerns about Madison captaining him if he does hypothetically get benched before kickoff, but he's named to start, so he's someone who's on my radar. I'm not bringing him in purely because I want to bring in Pappenhausen and Latrell, and I don't think I can bring in those two and Madison. I'd be pretty envious of anyone who has that kind of cash at this time of the year.
Yep. Fanua Pole was pretty good on debut, the young prop from the Tigers. He's the cheapie of the week. He's the third most purchased player. It makes sense to me. He got 44 points in 42 minutes. So they are big minutes for a rookie prop. And looked good. He was taking on some of the big boys and didn't look out of place at all. I don't think it's the time in the year to be going for cheapies at prop. I'd probably prefer enough like Hosking. But look, I can still get around why people are going for Pole as well.
Yeah, I can understand because, like I've said before on a few other players, he will be a body on the field this week. If you're bringing in people just to play, he is cheap. But he's probably not someone who's on my radar. I think James Tarmo is back from injury as well, so not exactly sure he'll get 42 minutes again this week. But his PPM looks good, so he could be a decent cheap purchase for this week.
What are your thoughts on Brandon Smith, Wilso? It's a bit of a controversial point in SuperCoach right now. He is just so cheap for a player of his calibre at 353, but obviously there are reasons why he's so cheap as well. But without Harry Grant this week, then Harry Grant probably, potentially, maybe doesn't back up. So he should be having 2 really solid weeks of big minutes in a row, and then we'll wait and see what happens from there. But I feel like Brandon Smith at this price is a pretty good purchase, and he's a guy that I'd prefer at that price rather than going for a full-on cheapie.
Yeah, like we were saying before, like now's not really. We've sort of passed the point where cheapies are important. Just now that we're heading towards the back end of the season and you're running out of trades. But Bran Smith, I do think he's sort of only like a 1 or 2 week play with Harry Grant out this week and playing reduced minutes next week presumably. I mean, Bran Smith, we know that like when he starts a hooker and plays big minutes, he scores well. But he really will only score like really well if he scores like a try or 2, which up against Sharks, it's hard to get a sort of read on that. So I'm avoiding him. But if you've got the trades and the cash to bring him in for a couple of weeks, then I think he will score points.
Latrell Mitchell's really popular too. I unfortunately can't fit him in because I've got Pappenhausen and Nico Hines at fullback, and I can't switch that around with the halves that I've got, unfortunately. So it's not an option for me, and a lot of this will depend on your team makeup. But Latrell Mitchell was huge on his return from injury, 90-odd points. It's a decent price for a player of his calibre. I know that fullback's a tough position for SuperCoach in that there are so many guns to fit in that spot. But I do really like him, and I kind of wish I could bring him in, but the option's been taken off the table for me with the current makeup of my team.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's he's one of those players that I think not a lot of people are going to be able to afford to bring in at this point in the season, which could make him a little bit of a pod. He does have the Knights this week and then the Bulldogs next week. So 2 pretty good matchups coming up. Then after that, it's sort of back and forth every couple of weeks. Like I'm just looking at it now. After that, they've got Storm, then Sharks, then Warriors, which is a pretty good matchup, then Parramatta, then Panthers, then Cowboys, then Roosters. So they do have a really tough schedule after this next 2 good matchups. So he's a bit of a risky purchase, but I'm sort of at that point in the season where I'm happy to take the risk.
Yeah, he's always a risky buy, but I feel like you think of this as a 2-week buy at the bare minimum with these 2 really good matchups, and then see what happens from there. You could trade into Tedesco, for example, in 2 weeks' time, or 3 weeks' time, rather, after these 2 games. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you have too much to lose in getting Latrell over the next 2 weeks and then reassessing from there. Isaiah Tass, I mentioned it before, but he is back for the Rabbitohs and he's looking pretty... sorry, not back. He played last week and he's been named again this week. Looked pretty likely too, and he's got that matchup against the Knights, so it's an important extra number in this buy round.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's one of those players that I had earlier in the season and sold before it actually made me any money. So I can't bear to bring him back in. But like we're saying about Latrell, decent matchup this week and next week, and then it gets pretty tough. So if you're looking for someone to bring in pretty much purely for the buy round, I think he's a decent buy, and he's still not too expensive.
Losers list, we're moving on to that now. Campbell Graham, big news today coming through from the great Tim Williams, our late and early mailman, that he's out for facing 2 months off with a facial fracture. This is big news for SuperCoach because he has been one of the most consistent and best centre wingers in SuperCoach so far this year. And one of the main reasons people brought him in was to cover this buy round. That won't happen this week, unfortunately.
Yeah, sadly, this is one of those instances where people who brought in players ahead of the buy round are getting punished really hard. He's definitely someone who was on my radar. It's just unfortunate that, people who brought him in a couple of weeks ago for this buy round are now going to be down to another player. So yeah, I mean, he's obviously a sell, and yeah, very unfortunate.
Moving on to Payne Haas, so not named for the Broncos, obviously. He's missed out on Origin as well. The mail there is that he probably misses 2 weeks and rests up those shoulders, and he's got an ankle issue as well, so he's pretty banged up. I think it was ridiculous for the Broncos to have played him last week, to be honest, with Origin looming. They just needed to give him a rest. He is going to get a rest now, and he is one of the most sold players, but I feel like he will come good at some stage. After these 2 games that he rests up, then he can come back, play big minutes and be a really solid SuperCoach player to the end of the year. So I'm holding, and I'm going to be covering with Max King, not this week, but in the coming weeks, until Haas comes back. What are your thoughts, Wilso?
Yeah, I can understand why lots of people are jumping ship, given that he, the past month he's been playing through injury and not scoring, the numbers that we sort of have come to expect from Payne Haas. But I think a couple of weeks off will do him a ton of good, and I'll be holding as well. I mean, he's still in 41% of teams, I think. But, as teams jump off, he won't go into pod territory, but he will be far less owned than he is now. So I'll be holding as well with the hope that he does sort of come good when he comes back from injury. Yeah,
he'll definitely be in somewhat of pod territory for teams who are actually caring about SuperCoach and actually making trades now. I think that ownership's obviously way up, given that there are some zombie teams floating around. Also on the losers list for SuperCoach, even though it's a big win this week for CSC for Talakai, and that he's been named in the New South Wales Origin team yet again. But it is a blow for SuperCoach that he won't play. A lot of people have sold over the last few weeks. I'm holding on. I still think he is a keeper, and he's got plenty to offer at centre wing this year. Not as a second rower in SuperCoach this year, but certainly at centre wing, he's right up there with the best guys.
Yeah, he's someone that in the past couple of weeks, when I was sort of making my moves, I moved him down to my centre wing to bring in some other second rowers that are sort of keepers. I can't understand why people are selling. The Sharks do have a really tough schedule coming up. They've got obviously Storm this week, and then Cowboys and Panthers. So it's a tough little run, and then it gets a lot easier. They've got South Dragons and Tigers, Bulldogs and Knights to finish off the season. So tough next few weeks, but then it gets pretty good. So I'm definitely holding him as well.
Just a quick note, I know this is obvious, but obviously all Origin players are out this week, so that includes some really popular guys like Harry Grant, Cameron Munster, Cameron Murray, Damien Cook, etc. Then we have half the teams on the bye as well. I just want to do a really quick test with you, Will. So most popular sells this week. I'm just going to run through them quickly and see if you'd be selling. Jacob Carraz, do you think he has to go?
Not a must sell, but if you've got to move him on to bring in better players, then yes.
Yeah, I would be selling. I'm just worried. I know he's got those awesome base stats, but I'm just a bit worried about his attacking upside, i.e. the big attacking stats at the Bulldogs. I don't think they're going to get too many. Angus Crichton is a really popular sell. Obviously doesn't play this week. Form has been a little bit lackluster recently. Obviously, he had that sin bin on the weekend as well.
Yeah, Angus Crichton would probably be the first player I'd be looking to get rid of. He's definitely someone who's on. I have him, and he's on my radar to sell. I thought about selling a few weeks ago, but kind of decided just to hold. But am regretting that, given he's sort of back to the poor numbers he was putting up at the start of the year. So, and his break even's 96. So. He lost some cash at the start of the year, clawed some back, and now it's starting to disappear really quickly again. So, definite sell for me.
And the other one that I'm tossing up is Max King. Very popular sell this week, but he's been really solid in that front row position and actually picked up dual position status over the weekend. So for me, he'll be my Payne Haas cover. I'm going to hold him. but he doesn't play this week, obviously. So I can see why people would downgrade to Pole or upgrade to a keeper.
Yeah, I think at this point of the season, I wouldn't be downgrading him. I think you've got to try and if you can upgrade him to someone else who, especially if they cover this bye round, I would consider doing that. But I'm the same as you. I'll be holding him over the next couple of weeks with Payne Haas out, even though he doesn't play the bye round this week.
Right, well, let's run through each of the games. We've got the Sharks v the Storm in the first clash. The news here, obviously, is that Nico Hines is in. CSC for Talakai not playing because of blue selection. Supercoach-wise, Ronaldo Mulatalo is a guy who stands out for me. Relies a lot on the guys inside him to deliver him good ball. So, look, I'm probably not going there, but is there anyone that stands out for you in this side, Wilso?
To be honest, not really. I mean, I do really like Sione Katoa and Ronaldo Mulatalo, but for me, they're both just a bit too expensive at this point of the season, given how try-dependent they are. I mean, I'm not sure either of them are even keepers. I mean, I did say before that the Sharks, they've got a rough few weeks, and then the schedule does get really good. So they could be pretty popular pods in the coming weeks, but I think there's just a bit too much risk there for me.
Moving on to the Storm, Grant Anderson is the big news there for super coaches, given that he has been named on the wing and retained in that side. Everyone's all over Ryan Pappenhausen. Brandon Smith as well. Pretty popular super coach team. Anyone else standing out for you, Wilso?
I do quite like Jerome Hughes as well. I know a lot of people have been buying him in the last couple of weeks in anticipation of this bye round, and they are down a few stars, and it is a pretty tough matchup against the Sharks. But I think they've still got Pappenhausen, Hughes, and Smith there, so I think those three could be pretty good point scorers over the next couple of weeks.
Moving on to the Knights v the Rabbitohs. The Knights, look, they got Jaden Brayley and Bradman Best back, so that's big news for them. In terms of NRL, obviously Dane Gagai and Callum Ponga are out through Origin, though. David Clemmer is a guy who's taken my eye somewhat, but I don't think he's done enough to be brought into my team.
Yeah, I actually have David Clemmer. I brought him in a few weeks ago when he was sort of playing his best footy of the season, and obviously playing more minutes as well. But then in the last couple of weeks, the minutes have sort of dropped back a little bit. And yeah, I don't regret buying him, but I wouldn't be going out of my way to get him in this week unless you're desperate for a front rower for the bye round. He is probably one of the best options that does actually play this week. But I think as they have more players return from injury, his minutes are going to keep dropping. So he's definitely not a keeper for me.
Moving on to the Rabbits, Campbell Graham facial fracture is a big one. Alex Johnston is a guy who is very popular this week. He's going pretty well, scoring lots of tries, and he does rely on the tries, obviously. Is he on your radar?
I definitely can't afford to bring in both him and Latrell, so it's sort of just one of them for me. And I do think they actually are pretty similarly priced, but Johnston a little bit too expensive for me considering how dependent on tries he is. He does have a good matchup this week, and I'd be pretty surprised if he doesn't score against the Knights. But I think it's just a bit of a luxury trade for me.
Moving on to Tigers v the Eels. I mean, again, Tigers are a pretty boring Supercoach team. They should be popular, but it's tough for them to be getting big attacking stats. Adam Dewey back into the starting side is probably the biggest news for them from an NRL perspective. But moving on to the Eels, Junior Paulo is out through Origin. Ryan Madison's back, so we've spoken about him, but he's obviously a big target. Micah Sevo is a guy who just keeps bouncing out at me, and I don't quite have the intestinal fortitude to bring him in.
Yeah, it'd definitely take a brave Supercoach to bring in Sevo. But I do really like his matchup this week up against the Tigers. So I'd be pretty shocked. Like Johnston, he seems like someone who's just destined to score this week. It's a good matchup. I do quite like Will Penasini as well. Obviously, lots of people started the year with him and have held him the whole year. I actually moved on from him earlier on, and I'm kind of regretting it now because knowing that he does have this good Tigers matchup this week, I think he probably would have been worth holding.
Yeah, I've held him, and look, I may well hold until the end of the season, although he could easily be an upgrade to a keeper next week. Moving on to the Broncos v the Dragons. At the Bronx, they've got a real injury and origin crisis with a whole bunch of players out like Capel, Cobbo, Carrigan, Flegler. Payne Haas is injured. They've lost to Murray Martin, which is relatively big news for SuperCoach because he still is owned by 10% of players. They've got Tessie New back. There's a whole bunch of changes there. In terms of SuperCoach, who's standing out for you here? One thing I want to point out is Ezra Mam is one of the most sold players, but he plays this week. So I don't understand why that. He's about the 4th or 5th most sold player. I don't understand that trade.
Yeah, that seems really weird to me. I'm just looking at his break even now. It is 61, so there's a chance he doesn't get that. But in his first couple of weeks, he was scoring really well, and he does have the Dragons. So even though the Broncos are down a lot of troops, they do still have their spine mostly intact. So, a bit of a head scratcher. I definitely wouldn't be selling anyone who plays this week.
I tend to agree, but if you are a head player and you can go to Pappenhausen, for example, it's not the worst trade, but I'd be looking to hold on Ezra Mam for this round at least and then assess from there. Moving on to the Dragons, the top 8 Dragons, also. And I'll point out that the Sea Eagles are not in the top 8, currently 9th.
Well, as long as Dragons keep winning and Manly keep only playing for 70 minutes, there's a chance Dragons do end up in the top 8 come the end of the year.
Well, unfortunately, the Sea Eagles do have the absolute freebie this weekend in the bye, so Dragons are going to need to.
We'll take those 2 free points.
Dragons are going to need to fire up at some stage, and it's a really good time of the year to be a really crap team because. None of your or barely any of your players get taken out for Origin, and you're playing against depleted sides. So we've got to make up as much ground as we can during this point of the season. Supercoach-wise, Zach Lomax has been popular. I'd say he's in that real sort of pod territory. He's certainly not really high on my list of centre wingers.
Yeah, I mean, assuming he doesn't score a try, Zach Lomax is still one of the most reliable centre wings in the competition, which for Supercoach wise, which is good for these kinds of rounds because you've got other people on your side that you're not really. They're more just bodies on the field rather than being point scoring machines. And the Broncos are severely depleted, so. If anyone's going to score for the Dragons, you'd think Zach Lomax and that right edge is a good chance of scoring some Supercoach points.
Absolutely, 100%. Big thanks to Wilso. That is our round 17 teams podcast. Buys to deal with, Origin to deal with. It's a tough week. Big thanks, Wilso, and we'll catch you for the pre-lockout podcast tomorrow at midday.